You're listening to Drug Positive, the risk reduction and benefit enhancement podcast, reducing shame and stigma to save lives and end the drug war. Hi everyone, I hope you're all doing okay, and I hope you still have access to the drugs you need to get through this. I know things are hard right now. Sheltering in place may not be easy. Maybe like me, you lost your income, you're worried about paying your rent or mortgage, maybe a general fear of what the future may hold. I get it. Me too. There's a lot more anxiety going around today. Meaning and motivation are harder to find. There's a lack of hugs. And for some, there's a lack of drugs. And for some people, drugs aren't just entertainment. A lot of people are going through forced detox right now. And if that's you, I just want you to know I feel for you. Please hang in there. You can get through this. Remember, we're all in this together. And when we come out the other side, we'll fight together. I, for one, will keep fighting for you, for your right to self-medicate, for your right to have access to a safe supply of opioids or whatever drug you choose to use. I have to admit, this pandemic has really shaken me. It's made me question and rethink everything. All my decisions in life, really. Everything I believe in. Take dance safe and harm reduction. Here we are, all of us in this movement trying to save people's lives, right? And how many lives have we saved? Well, I don't think we'll ever know. But now we have this pandemic, which is likely to kill far more people in just the next 18 months than have died from all drug-related causes in the last 20 years. So I can't stop thinking, saving lives? Is that really what I've been doing all these years? Is that really what I should be proud of? Is saving lives really what matters? Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying we shouldn't care about saving lives, obviously, but if saving as many lives as possible were the only goal, if that was the end in itself, if that's all that we see as valuable, then I, for one, haven't accomplished much. A tiny little coronavirus is proof of that. Are you with me? It's not about the numbers, the dry numbers of how many lives we've saved. And if not, then what is valuable? What makes dance safe and harm reduction actually important? What have we really been doing all these years? What should I actually be proud of? And if not saving lives, then what? I've really been thinking about this every day since the pandemic hit. And I think the answer is on a spiritual level. And by that, I mean changing people inside. Harm reduction is about love and respect. It's about meeting people where they are and not judging them, helping them find and use safely the drugs they want to use without condemning them or gaslighting them or making them feel like they're bad or sick. This approach changes a person. It actually changes both people in the interaction. Testing someone's drugs, giving them a clean needle, educating them on how to use drugs safely. Sure, this might save lives, but there's a bigger, more important change happening here too. One that you can't measure. Let's call it a change of soul. I was a volunteer for Food Not Bombs in Berkeley, California for 4 years before I started Dance Safe. We cooked and served food for a lot of homeless people in People's Park right next to the university. And our philosophy, Food Not Bombs is still around, by the way, and they still have this philosophy. The philosophy is that there's no difference between those of us who cook and those of us who eat. Those of us with houses or those without. Anyone can cook, anyone can eat. That's the Food Not Bombs motto. In other words, we weren't social workers or church do-gooders serving those poor, unfortunate other people. We were and are the people serving ourselves. We're one community cooking and eating together, meeting our basic needs. This is how I see Dance Safe too, by the way. You know, I used to cook with Radio Man. Radio Man was a Berkeley character back in the day. A big black homeless dude who wore headphones and walked around constantly reciting radio monologues. Some people thought he was parroting what he was listening to through his headphones, but the headphones were never plugged in. He just had this running monologue going on in his head, and he shared it out loud constantly for all of us to hear. Chopping vegetables with Radio Man taught me that we're all the same, that there is no us and them. We can draw all the distinctions that we want, schizophrenic, druggy, whatever. We all have problems. We all have voices in our head. We all use drugs. We all experience suffering and joy. And so we need to treat each other with love and respect and stop creating false distinctions that make us feel superior to other people. And we have to stop believing those people who tell us we're inferior. You're okay. You're fine just as you are. You like using drugs? Awesome. Me too. Let me help you find the real ecstasy you're looking for. The real you actually is ecstasy. It's all of us. I'm proud of you for seeking out ecstasy and using it. Here, take a testing kit. Let me help you find it. Let me help you use it so you will know that you, like all of us, are love. The recognition of our common suffering, that's where meaning lies. It's not in saving lives per se. It's in treating others with dignity and respect out of a recognition that they are you. Of course, that sometimes means saving lives, like we need to stay home right now. Okay, stay home. But staying home is meaningful not because of the number of lives it will save, as great as that number will be, but because it's a demonstration of love and respect. Making this small sacrifice for others right now is a recognition of our common suffering and our common identity. And then there's all the people on the front lines, of course, making even bigger sacrifices. Thank you to all you first responders, healthcare workers, grocery store clerks, the person who delivered my groceries. Even if you're just doing it for money, you're still out there doing it. So thank you. And I'll continue to fight for you as well, for higher wages, for an end to student debt, for healthcare as a human right and all that stuff. Whether you use drugs or not, we're all in this together. To me, this is the lesson of this virus. I think it's here to teach us. And for me, the biggest lesson it's teaching me is the lesson of death. The coronavirus is awakening us to death. It's reminding us of death's inevitability. Because we live in a culture that suppresses the idea of death. Capitalism, endless growth, racing towards the future, thinking we can live forever, that the Earth's population can keep growing, a bigger and bigger GDP every year, more money, more gadgets, expanding outward infinitely, right? Even those who recognize climate change is real, they're still stuck in this mindset. They might worship Elon Musk and think, oh, well, all we need to do is build electric cars to keep growth on track, or we'll just colonize Mars and then move on to the rest of the galaxy. This is our culture. You know it's true. Even if intellectually you know it's all bullshit and that there are natural limits to growth, it still lurks in your unconscious, mine as well, because it's a part of our collective culture, and we can't escape our collective culture. This drive towards physical immortality, this Star Trek fantasy, it's all an illusion. You're going to die. I'm going to die. Humanity at some point is going to die out. Nothing lives forever. And the coronavirus, I think, is here to teach us this. The coronavirus came from Earth, and I believe it came to humble us. Sure, let's do what we need to respect and love others, stay home and all that. Let's get a vaccine and let's come out the other end of this in 18 months or however long it takes. But let's please learn the lesson, because we cannot go back to normal. We can't go back to capitalism, endless growth, debt-based money, and all that same normal that got us here in the first place. Let's learn the lesson and make the changes we need to make. Okay, thank you. So this episode is about Straight Incorporated, a boot camp style anti-drug brainwashing and torture program from the 1980s, started in Florida by shopping mall developer and millionaire asshole Mel Sembler. Believe it or not, I grew up in the same town as this guy, St. Petersburg, Florida. His wife, Betty, brought clothes into my father's dry cleaners. I hung out as a teenager in the shopping malls that he built. What else were we going to do in suburban Florida as a teenager? Hang out in the mall and use drugs, right? Anyway, I washed this motherfucker's clothes, Mel Sembler. And talk about greed and judgment. Mel Sembler epitomizes all of this. Pride, fear, self-righteousness, ignorance. The man's actually still alive. He and Betty started the Partnership for a Drug-Free America, now called the Drug-Free America Foundation. Outside of government, they've funded nearly all the anti-drug campaigns you've ever heard of. Mel Sembler's money was used when neighboring states sued Colorado for legalizing cannabis. Betty Sembler is friends with Nancy Reagan and is the one who came up with the phrase, "just say no." The Semblers paid for the fried egg commercial. It goes on and on. There is nobody more responsible for this disastrous war on drugs than Mel and Betty Sembler. I've always found it interesting that a druggie from their own town ended up starting Dance Safe, the positive alternative to Straight in many ways, yeah? And while Straight got shut down, and while the Semblers are increasingly becoming less and less relevant in the world, Dance Safe is still around and stronger than ever. How do you like that, Mel? Oh, and let me tell you, if you don't already know, your own children use drugs. The same children you're estranged from. That means you failed, Mr. Sembler. Not only could you not create a drug-free America, but you couldn't even stop your own kids from using drugs. You lost, drugs won. All right, let's just get on the episode. So in this episode, I interview Frank Haines, who wrote a book about his experiences as a teenager sent to Straight. It's called Florida Damage Report. I loved it. Once I started reading it, I just couldn't put it down. And this interview is awesome too. Frank's an amazing guy. He lives today in Brooklyn. He's an avid, responsible drug user and is part of the electronic music scene out there. A true survivor and thriver. So let's just get right to it. I recorded this interview before the pandemic and the next episode as well. Anyway, here it is, my interview with Frank Haines. Frank, thanks for being on the show. Just want to tell you, I loved your book.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for your work.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, it has special interest for me because I also grew up in Florida, and I actually had a friend, Kurt, who got sent to Straight by his parents after they caught him smoking pot. Anyway, thanks for writing this book.
How long was Kurt in there?
Maybe a year. Yeah.
Yeah, it's about the average.
When he got out, he got a job and left his parents' home and was living with someone who also smoked pot. And so he didn't stop using drugs after he got out. You know, I want to start by just asking you to repeat for the audience some of these incredible stories, some of the violence and crazy events that happened, because there's so many of them. What stands out most to you before I ask?
Well, there was so much like person-to-person violence. But I think the thing that stuck out for me that made me, it was an anecdote that I would talk about sometimes, is when I saw someone like run across the room and bash their head into a vending machine and like all the glass busted out and it was just full of like chips and blood and someone like kind of knocked out by the movement of that. But it was just, emblematic of taking teens and putting them in this room and like denying them everything,
Right.
denying them like any kind of sense of identity or being able to like express themselves or talk. Everything had to be framed within this weird idea of rehab.
Yeah. And now, did he do that to try to get out? Do you think that was an intentional act of self-harm so that he could be Baker acted and get the fuck out of the brainwashing camp?
I think that was a exit strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was like running for the electric fence. I saw a few of those, or people that would sneak razors into the room somehow at night and just carve on themselves. I don't know if it was intentional or not, but it just seemed like the pain was that hard in there that people resorted to that. There's half the people there had carved on their arms, like with gravel or things that you could find on the ground. So I don't know. It was like kind of a den of misery, really, being in that place, especially at that age when you're a teenager and you can't make sense of anything. And your parents, who you think are your protectors, have suddenly intentionally, voluntarily put you in this program,
Right,
where your reward, what you work for, is to apologize to your parents. Like, that's the like crazy making material.
You were mentioning in your book that on Fridays, that was like Parents' Day when the parents came.
Yeah.
But the only conversations they allowed you to have with them were to apologize. Like, you couldn't say anything else to them but apologies, and they would whatever
Right.
they do if you tried to say anything else to your parents.
You would have a old comer, which was a let's just call it another captive in the program who was further along in their program than you, that would supervise you and keep you on point in these initial conversations that you'd have with your parents. Friday night was what they'd call an open meeting, when all the parents would arrive, because Straight would say that just as much as the child was in therapy, the parents also needed to like follow the scripts that were ordained for parents. So then everyone would be in one room at once. A microphone would be passed through the crowd. If the child had, not been working, did not receive like what they'd call talk or TNR, or was on a phase, the parents would stand up in front of the entire assembled crowd and address their kid on the microphone. And usually it was to say how disappointed they were, or they wished they would work the program, or anything. But it was psychotic.
Uh-huh. And okay, so some people committed acts of self-harm so that they could get out of there and maybe get to a mental hospital, which would have been so much better than being straight. The other tactic that people used to survive this experience was the tactic that you used. At some point after being there, you decided, okay, I'm going to have to pretend. I'm going to have to fake my way through it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what you did.
I don't know that I faked it, though, at the time.
Huh.
I think I definitely, there's people that told me they faked it, and I could barely believe them because I didn't feel that ideologically strong to fake something for 13 months. Reason being is honesty was like such a pivotal principle in that place. And you were constantly in this state of paranoia if you were really being totally honest. Like, that was a guiding thing. So, for years afterwards, I'd be like, I couldn't tell someone it was 3:45. I'd be like, oh, it's 3:39. Like, and then wrap that up in like some Christian religion thing too, where there's all that guilt, and it's just a total mind fuckery. So,
you do end the book with a girl you were in there with who told you she faked her way through it.
Yes. And I was in disbelief when she told me that. I'm like, how did you do that for so long? Because I wasn't able to. It broke me. I fought it hard in the beginning, but then it overpowered me just through like strength and being put in jail. And then I just felt like I had nothing left but to work this thing.
Okay. So did you believe that you were an addict, even though you had only drank alcohol, smoked pot, and took acid?
Took acid like 5 times. Barely smoked pot with any regularity. But, as a teen, you're just like, oh, that's around? Yeah, I'll try that. Like, it's just a willingness to try everything. But I didn't get that far at all, especially because, this is 1989. I don't know if you could call that the peak of the war on drugs, but it was definitely in like full swing.
It's hard to know when the peak was. Maybe we're still in the peak of it, even
100%.
though cannabis is being legalized. In some communities, cannabis arrests are higher, especially communities of color. So who knows?
And who's still in jail and all that too. But This was the answer to, oh, you're having problems with your teen? They're probably addicted to drugs. And they'd have a checklist of all these things, and it's like, oh, they probably have a problem with drugs. So kids, that net, that was a huge net. So anywhere from like kids as old as 13 to the legal age of 18. And there'd be people in there like after that age too.
Do you know how much your parents paid?
That I don't really know. I think their insurance somehow covered it.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They got credited as official rehab until they were shut down, at least.
Yeah, by HRS. I think that's what it was called in Florida. Totally shut down. But anyway, as a side note, all those people that were participating in straight, I think still in one way or another work in programs like that are just under new names of like rehab. Like that's their, I don't know, their calling or something that they felt like. And back when I was on Facebook, I was part of some straight groups who were constantly trying to out these people who still worked in that field.
Wow. Right.
And like that worked under different names or anything.
Have you gotten together with other straight graduates or people that captives? You call them captives in the book. Is that what you were called? The word you used while you were there?
Never.
Oh,
ever.
okay.
It's the word I use. It's the word I use now. That
I was gonna say that would be really ironic. I mean, in some ways, they kind of know you all are prisoners, but they probably didn't use that term.
Yeah, I don't know that they use clients or patients or anything. So I didn't hear a lot of that language. It being a participant of it.
Right. So, one thing everyone knows, or a lot of people know about, is the whole belt loop. People grabbing you by the belt loop or whatever.
Yeah.
Is that anywhere you moved, you had to have somebody grasp onto the back of your belt loop?
Yeah, anytime that you were not, anytime you'd be walking near a door or you could potentially exit something, it was belt looped. So anytime you'd get up from group and go to the bathroom, they might not have, I think inside the building, maybe not as much, but usually it was an option to belt loop you.
And that was staff who did it, or was like, you mentioned like you go through different levels from 1 to 5, like a newcomer is level 1 or whatever, and then, so what did the higher level people belt loop the earlier, younger level members?
I don't really remember being belt looped by the staff as much as the oldcomers would mostly do that. Yeah, put that hand down there. Kind of like a loop around, like a finger would go in the belt loop and then it would loop around and grab the back of your pants.
Right. Now, like you describe so much violence by these staff members and or tolerated violence by one captive to another.
Yeah.
Why do you think they got away with that for so long?
I think most of the violence that would happen from the staff was in terms that they would restrain kids. Like kids would be like out of control. So they would usually have these techniques of restraining that would be like tacking your arms back and crossing your legs and holding you down, usually face down. So the first time it happened to me, it was just a violence to get me there, to get me on the ground, to hold me in that place, which is nearly violent. And I was resisting too. But then getting like tackled by like 4 staff members of both sexes, and then holding you down. And usually when you were held down, the other kids would go crazy and want to get called on so they could scream at you. Like they could scream at you to reinforce the ideology while you were restrained. And that was my first experience too, was being restrained. And it just was because I didn't want to, I was in there with a bunch of rednecks that were like the staff members who I didn't respect at all. So, I just got forced into it. They were a joke to me. They were idiots, but that was my own thing, that for carrying that over from living in Florida.
Right. All right. So the program they had you work, it sounds like there was a lot of elements of 12-step in there. Was it pretty much just 12-step, or did they have a different ideology?
Pretty much all the, with the exception of what's called the principles in AA, the 12 principles, everything else from AA, you'd see up on they look like hand-painted signs. So at about right below the ceiling, all 12, in front of the group, you'd have all 12 steps that were up there. Yeah, it was totally like AA, NA boot camp kind of shit.
All right.
100%. Yeah, that was like the guiding principle for what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm. All right, so you resisted a lot. You got beat up. You tried to run away. It was a horrible experience for you. What was the final straw that made you decide, okay, I'm going to work this system? Whether it was totally honest or partially you just realizing you need to do this to get the fuck out of there. What was it that made you turn and stop rebelling?
I think I felt like it was probably a month in and I'd resisted and I'd gotten so much physical altercations with staff. And then I did run away and I was put in jail and then the detention center, in Orlando. And then it was a really empty life at that point. There was nothing, it's 16, you're taken out of your home and just sleeping with all these strangers. And I think I had the imprint and the ideology of Christianity, which works so hand in hand sometimes with like the second steps, like saying you're powerless and you need a higher power, that you need to like turn your life over to a higher power. The language is really equated with like born again Christianity.
Right.
So that's what I had as my like models of consciousness. So I felt like, okay, I'm going to, like I did a double whammy. I was like, I'm going to work this program and I'm going to turn my life over to Jesus, because I had been heard that too. And that, you know, no one says Jesus in there, but it's Central Florida. And it's like, that's just, so I kind of made those two decisions. I remember the night I'm like, okay, I'm giving my life over to Jesus Christ and I'm going to work this program. And weirdly, I really excelled after that, because I was like, oh, I'm into Jesus now.
So you grew up that way. You talk about your family being missionaries. Your sister, even in the Philippines, was religious. But you also describe her as pretty cool. Like she maybe be one of those good Christians out there that isn't so brainwashed or whatever. And then so I
don't know if I believe those exist so much anymore, but yes, I hear what you're saying. But
So you were prepped with the Christian ideology, and the 12-step stuff kind of overlap with that, so it was easy for you to kind of take that on. But then in the book, you talk about even after you get out of straight, you went to church and you went to a Christian school, but you didn't even really get along with the other kids in that school, and you shed it pretty quickly. 6 months or something after you're out of straight, you let go of it all. Did you start thinking at around that time, like, you know, maybe you didn't, while you were doing it, it was actually honest and authentic for you, but like once you let it go, like, you know, when did you have to come up with this realization that like, man, I had to do this to survive, and that was totally fucked up, you know?
Well, I got out of there like at the cusp of like the middle of my 17th year. So for one, I had a lot of hormones that were going on, and I wanted to be active. I wanted to get with girls, all this stuff, but it felt like that was prohibited. I mean, that was kind of like a big driving force. I was like, I want to be like carnal, but this is not a part of the system of Christianity. So I just really thought, I'm like, I'm going to put this aside, and I'll come back to this later if this is real. But yeah, I started to be able to have my own identity, and like form my own identity, which wasn't that, you know, and kind of like, I don't know, thaw out of that big freeze of being in that place. But old punk friends of mine would approach me when I was in the library, I remember, and I was just afraid of them. Right. Even though they're my old friends, and they're like, "What's wrong with you?" I was like, "I can't talk to you. You're my druggy friends." You know, like everything. It was just this ideology that was so put into me, and you know, just like, oh, they're druggy friends. No, I can't hang out with them. I had to go to that Christian school because my mother was afraid of the druggy friend influence.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm asking. I mean, you wrote this book that is remarkably detailed and critical of this fucked up rehab boot camp experience you went through, but in the book you are talking about becoming a Christian and working the system, and then so like at some point you started to develop a bigger critique of what happened that led you to write this book.
I have to say that the real critique of this didn't happen until probably 2008. That I really critiqued that time period, because for some reason I thought I didn't really need to go to therapy because I had been in 13 months of therapy. Like I thought about it that way for a really long time. And it was a girlfriend I had at the time, and I was telling her about it. She's like, dude, that shit's crazy. Like that place looks fucking insane that you're in. I'm like, really? She's like, yeah, that's totally fucked up. And then I did start going to therapy, and my therapist is like, yeah, everything you're describing is crazy making.
Right.
And I, you know, even though I was like far from sober at that point, I still hadn't really kind of like come to grips with how dark that was. And then it really like going to therapy like really unlocked some keys about the trauma of that place and the trauma that I had. Even like you're kicked out of your home, you know, like that's where people want to be. They want to be at home. Like,
yeah.
I don't know, maybe if it's a really like damaged scenario there, you don't want to be, but I didn't want to be like with a bunch of these like gross kids and like not even be able to, you know, go to the bathroom by myself without somebody watching me. I didn't want to go. I mean, it's like I was institutionalized. So
Yeah, being told you have a disease and
A disease.
being subjected to all this violence unless you conform to their beliefs and understandings about yourself. And
Exactly.
yeah. So 2008. So you're in your mid-30s. That's 10 years later. That's more than 10 years later. After
More
you
than
got
10 years later. Yeah. I mean,
Huh.
I knew that it was I went weirdly when I got out of Florida State undergrad. I had this idea that I wanted to be an art teacher, because I was going to go to grad school. And I was mowing lawns in Orlando, and I actually went to be a staff member I don't talk about this in the book. I went to be a staff member to just teach art at what Straight had become. And it was so weird in there. I think I was not a match for that place. I was still sober at that point. I stayed sober until I didn't drink alcohol until I was 29. And then it's been a slow progression into everything else I do now. And
Welcome back.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a very active drug user now, and very open to speak about that too. But I'm kind of the psychedelic drugs, the psychoactives is what I deal in. But that's I soak in that now. But a lot of that happened more in my 40s.
I see. Yeah.
That got it into a full swing, which it's kind of nice to have my adult brain into that too. I didn't do MDMA till I was probably 42.
Oh wow, lucky you!
The first time,
you're still almost a virgin. You can enjoy it a lot longer. To me, it's like Breaking Bad. I kind of wish that I could erase my memory of Breaking Bad so that I could watch it again new, because it's such a great show.
Right.
It'd be awesome to have no memory of MDMA and then be able to do it for the first time again.
I agree with that, and that's the thing. I mean, you've been an influence with that too in your show, but I like having my adult brain. I don't. There's the criteria of trouble except for cops it's not really a part of my brain. When you're a teen and you're younger, I'm gonna get busted, but
right.
Yeah, I love it. Plus, just not along a side, but also an aside is there's a great dance community in New York.
Oh yeah, in
so
Brooklyn,
there's a lot of
for sure. Yeah,
there's a lot of great private parties that aren't at bars or clubs, and it's kind of a good way to interact with those substances too.
Absolutely. God, I can't think of a place more diametrically opposite to Florida than Brooklyn. You're in a good spot.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. One final thing about that is that this Sunday I'm going to go to the Loft's 50th anniversary, which is so fucking incredible that party's been going for 50 years. I'm so psyched.
All right. Anyway, I underlined stuff in your book. I just want to kind of go through it a little bit and ask you some things. One of the things I didn't realize, and I just wanted to make sure, is this actually true? You say there's no sleeping done at the Straight building itself. You always slept at participating parents' homes?
Never slept inside the building. The building just housed the meetings that would happen there. And it was usually, from probably a 7 to 6, however the parents could probably get there and then go to work. But they were called host homes. And I think mostly if you had a child in the program, you usually had you had your home open to them staying there. So it usually comprised of 3 to 6 kids that would leave the facility at night. And, they'd have a ratio of old comers to newcomers. You'd be belt looped out of the building. You'd be in a line formation, belt loop, and, newcomers belt looped. You'd be belt looped out to a car. Usually in the car, it would be an old comer would sit between 2 newcomers, and they would lock their legs around the newcomers so they couldn't just pop out of the car. There's all these devices made so people weren't able to run. And then the host home bedroom was bare mattresses, and the windows and doors were all keyed off with alarms.
Were they paid? Were those parents paid?
They had to. I bet there had to be. I wonder, but it seems like there would have been some compensation for paying for food or.
Right.
I'm not sure
how
that
for expenses.
Worked. Yeah, and then gas, but I don't know if it was a volunteer thing with being in there because I wasn't doing it. I could ask my mom, but.
What do your parents think about this now? Have you talked to them since 2008, since you wrote this book? Obviously, did you give them this book?
100% gave my whole family this book, and my mother is it's just the way how hard these ideas die off. She read it, she's like. Oh, I would have done the same thing again if I had to do it over. I was like, really? After you read that? I was like, you do the same thing over again if you read that. She's like, yeah, you were going to fry your brain out on acid. You were walking down in the middle of A1A, all fried out in acid. And I had to tell her, I'm like, that actually never happened. I never walked down there And I'm like, also, that doesn't happen. People don't fry their mind out on LSD. There's enough, like, I would tell her these things, but it's just like people don't want to let ideas lie. The Semblers is probably a great example of this. You're like, I have this idea. I'm not going to listen to any critical analysis of it. I'm just going to hold on because this is what I believe. I mean, the world's rampant of things like that.
Yeah.
So we have a good relationship, and I'm with my mother, I'm speaking, and I'm pretty direct, but for some reason, maybe it's too much for her to really look at that and regret that happened. But
sure. And realize she may have hurt you by putting you in there. Yeah.
But also it is, I don't know. Maybe it did help me escape Central Florida, which I'm glad I did. But no, it was a harsh zone, harsh pill being in that.
Well, one thing I wanted to ask you, because you do talk a lot about your childhood, your life before straight, your drug use, and we grew up around the same time and around the same location. We're both in the punk scene. There was violence in our childhoods and in our social life, and we were both that kind of Holden Caulfield, fuck this world kind of kids or whatever, right? But for whatever reason, I got into drugs in a healthier way than you did. You describe your early drug use, and I'm reading and going, God, it's like you're sort of haphazard, like not really thoughtful about it or whatever. It kind of was part and parcel of your rebellion. Whereas for me, kind of by the time when I was a teenager using drugs, my first drug, was LSD, and I researched it and went to the library and read Leary and Huxley and Ginsberg and all these 60s guru guys to learn how to do it right, and went out into the woods and did it with close group of friends like we were instructed to do by the elders in the psychedelic movement. Whereas you describe dropping acid before going to work, the kind of unconscious use that I started Dance Safe to sort of change those kind of behaviors, right? And stop me if that's an unfair characterization, but it kind of comes across that way. And the thing that I've always thought was so detrimental about straight and the way youth rebellion and drugs were thought of is that it doesn't break that mold. It just reinforces that. Instead of telling you, hey, there's benefits to these substances, you can do them correctly, they don't have to be a rebellious thing to say fuck you to the world. They don't have to be self-destructive. They're just reinforcing, oh my God, what's wrong with you? You're hurting yourself. You're being self-destructive, and you need to come around to our view that not using drugs is the only way to be a healthy person. And it doesn't work. You're talking about your friends now who are still on that sort of destructive substance use path. And you describe some of them in your book who have died as a result of that. The straight program didn't help those people.
This was something I was going to talk to you about, whether, but it's just, there's a complete lack of like mentorship or stewardship about these chemicals, I don't know that it was completely out of rebellion. A lot of it was just curiosity to get into this like altered state you'd heard so much about and to want to try it. Mm-hmm. But I couldn't wait, like the moment I got acid, I'm like, I got to try this now, which could speak to a bigger thing about like whatever that, some spark in me that needed to do that. But I was so curious about those things. But once again, there's no stewardship like you had, or even the literature or anything. It was just like this other place. I mean, I think punk was that too. There was just at least more of a thoughtfulness than there was in like redneck beach culture.
Right.
Like I was lacking of, in school and all my peers too. I felt like drugs were part of that too, and that kind of mind experience. But
we should mention a lot of our listeners are probably young people, and you're like 4 years younger than me, but you also grew up in a time before the internet. And I think a lot of young people don't realize what it was like before the internet, and you had zero access to information about drugs, right?
Yeah, zero.
I just happened to read a book by Alan Watts, who was this 60s guru kind of guy, and he mentions LSD and Timothy Leary in the book. And then I go to the library, so I'm just intrigued. So I got this mentorship through reading some of the classic early books by the original psychedelic explorers, but certainly for a lot of young people back then, acid appeared in their life before even the name Timothy Leary came across the radar, where for me it was the opposite, right? I found out about it by reading books, and then I sought it out, whereas you probably didn't even know about any of this stuff when you first did it. So
not at all.
And today kids can just get on the internet and, learn everything they want about these substances. So
right.
It's a different world back then.
Different world, and 100% different world. I think it's a great time to live in that regards, and seeing slight transitions happening. But I love hearing that you had that kind of stewardship. It's a kind of a thing I've gleaned from your program too, to just tell you about why I like releasing the stigma of being a drug user. And I always tell people that. I'm like, no, I use drugs, and I talk about the drugs I use and why. Even big fan of ketamine. I love ketamine, but I'm also like, that has such stigma attached to it, I think, because people had bad stewardship with that too, and they used it like Coke. And I'm like, oh, and they think it's a terrible drug because of that. And I'm like, no, K-hole's a fantastic, wonderful place to explore, but step up to it. And the same thing with setting, I did acid before work, cleaning offices. It was terrible. Or washing dishes.
Right.
Around cops. It took me into terrible zones. But to know, set and setting, just to have those words.
Yeah.
Be like, no, be with your friends, have a good amount of time, know that it's temporary, it's all passing. Those are all things that were not part of my vernacular, and I had no one to tell me that either.
Right. Until you started listening to Drug Positive.
Oh, that helped. Yeah. That was, part of, but definitely, I mean, you were definitely part of a bigger language about that too, discussion about that.
Right. So are you in touch with people you were in straight with?
No, not really at all.
Yeah.
When I think about it, there's one friend. Yeah, there's a few people that I was able to send this to, but it's really, I don't talk to them hardly at all. Mm. But people that I knew around the time of exiting there. But no, not really.
Mm-hmm. Have you written anything else in your life?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
So
I wrote about...
you're a writer.
I publish, and I want to write. I love writing.
Yeah. How did you get into let the audience know, virtually every paragraph in the book begins with the two words, I remember. And pretty soon as you're reading it, you don't even notice the words I remember. They just serve as a lead-in for your recollections. But how did you decide to use that technique?
Well, a lot of ways this book came about is I was on my way to go do a 10-day Vipassana sit, and I took the bus from here to Massachusetts, and this was my 5th sit that I'd done, and I was finishing the book, I remember, on the bus ride up there. And I remember it was a book written by Joe Brainerd. Do you know Joe Brainerd?
Don't think so.
Joe Brainerd was definitely associated with a lot of the New York poets and writers, but I think he was maybe more known as a visual artist. The major book and anthology of New York poets, Brainerd did all the illustrations for that. Fantastic visual artist. But he did write that book. I remember sometimes they would just be segments, statements about things he remembered, seemingly growing up in the Midwest, middle of the 20th century, being an artist, being gay. Uh-huh. And when I was in Vipassana, when I was sitting there, probably halfway through the course, I really thought about being in straight. And I also had this model of reading that book. And I thought, okay, I'm going to just use this writing model to get all these ideas out, because it was a lot of fragments.
Right.
And I think what happens with that, I was later to find out that a lot of writers, even New York poets, did also use the I remember format to write as a writing exercise. And then I came to learn that other people had used it in prison as a writing exercise, because there's there can be a lack of linear narrative necessary or gravity when you write in that format. You can just put these segments, and then with this book, they became building blocks that I was able to then move around and to have a sort of narrative structure with it. But it facilitated the kind of flashback and the time thing that, it wasn't stuck to that thing. So I found it a really good exercise, because when I got out of that Vipassana, that 10 days of meditation, my mind was precise and super clear and pinpoint. So I was able to access all those things. My desktop wasn't cluttered with life in New York or whatever else. I had just been meditating in silence for 10 days. So I spent that time in my art studio just writing all the time, getting all that stuff out And that's precisely why I think my memory was so clear about pulling all those things up.
Right.
And then it kind of continued.
You didn't really talk much about your life in the book after. I'm just curious. What did you do then? When did you get to New York?
Yeah, I think about that editing is basically I ended that book when I left Central Florida, because it kind of was more than straight. It was about the ability to escape that area, which it's a fucking dead end. It's like there's like three options for you. You're going to either like deal drugs, work in construction, or work in a restaurant, or like the medical facility. Like there's not much else to do around there on the beach. Great place to retire, but
I totally remember. I grew up on St. Pete Beach, so I was just right across the state from you, and I have vivid memories. People gotta understand St. Pete, and it's probably the same. It's considered South Florida. You were closer to Orlando, but Central Florida the same way. It's like the retirement capital of the country, at least back then. My county had the largest percentage of people over 60 than any county in the country. It was like 60% over 60. And they're mostly New Yorkers, or we called them snowbirds sometimes because they'd only come down for half the year. And I vividly remember what they looked like. The men wore polo shirts, plaid pants, white socks pulled up their calf with loafers on, belts, chain jewelry, gold watches, and they treated us locals like we were natives to serve them. Literally, they were these rich people that came down to Florida and felt like they were going to live the good life that the advertisements told them they were when they buy their estate down there. And then we were there, growing up there with working class parents, just to provide services to them. So it's exactly, I remember the same thing you remember. It was a total dead end growing up in Florida in the 80s. It was like you were going to work in a restaurant or the tourist industry and somehow serve all these rich people getting paid back then $5.30 an hour or something like that. Minimum wage was at the time. Or you were going to deal drugs, right? Or somehow get the fuck out of there. So I chose Florida State because Tallahassee was the state college farthest away from St. Petersburg, and I wanted to get as far away as I could.
Well, and I think there's a lot of people that did end up dealing drugs in Florida, but I mean, it's just such a limited run that you're going to do that in the state, because the cops are just like have hard-ons for that shit.
Yeah,
like in that state more than any. Even like all the early Cops episodes, it's all Florida.
Oh my God, I tell people that the two times I got pulled over driving, running a red light or whatever it was, both times were at night, and both times the cop's shining a flashlight in my back seat before he even comes to the driver window. And the first thing he says to me is, "Been smoking any dope tonight?" Like literally, I'm 16 years old, just got my license. Cop pulls me over. First thing I learned really quickly, cops were not there to protect me. They were there to bust me. Like it was 100%. Just so obvious. And they don't even understand like how the drug war erodes a respect for police. They're just entrapped in this good guy, bad guy, moral, immoral dichotomy that's set up and perpetuated like the straight program does.
Yeah. And what would the relationship with cops be without the war on drugs? Like most people don't, I'm not like pro robbery and pro rape. I'm like, that's cool that there's cops to protect that shit. But it's like, people hate cops because they're worried about getting busted all the time.
Well, you should read this great book called Rise of the Warrior Cop. It's about the history of policing in America, and particularly how it was the drug war that essentially militarized the police and changed the whole relationship of policing. SWAT teams and tanks and things now all began with the drug war. There were many communities that didn't even have police. There were this country did not have police when it was founded. There were other ways that communities maintained order. Any case, it's a really good expose on how the drug war has really militarized our country. All right, so what do you? I was just gonna say, what do you want to say about straight?
Well, one of the highlights of our conversation is I referred to it as rehab, and you said you still call it that. But just about that,
Well, I don't believe in rehab at all. Just so you know, I don't believe that people who use drugs need rehabilitation. Rehabilitation is the kind of thing that North Korea does, or is the kind of thing that states do, and they want to like re-educate you to adopt a certain ideology. You know, people who have problematic drug use, they need support. They might need detoxing, you know, or they might need management to use drugs less problematically, you know, but there's no, you know, rehabilitation that word itself shows the mindset behind the drug war.
Right. Is that in its relation to like penitentiaries and penance? Like,
yeah,
there's
like
some like there's
you are
some,
criminal,
like,
you're a derelict, or you are ill. Even if you use the disease model, you're sick, and something needs to change. We need to reorient the way you're thinking about something. You know.
Yeah.
So.
Here's the consensus reality framework that you'd fit into. Yeah.
Right.
Of course. But maybe writing this book, there were anecdotes that I would tell because of just how crazy it was in that place. Like anecdotes of being a teen and just like cramming a bunch of 150 teens in this room and stripping away any kind of like sexual identity or anything from them and making them sit in chairs and go through a rap session where there was most of the rap sessions were set up in a 3-part way. That the first part of the rap was people talking about their past. So you would take a incident in your past. So let's say I would take the time that one of the multiple times I took acid and went to work, and I would spend like 2 paragraphs writing about the incident and what happened. And then I would take that incident. At night you had to write a thing called this is about enforcing the ideology, like a step that they use. You have to write they would call it a moral inventory report at night, where you would take a instance from your past, talk about it, and then describe it through the steps, 12 steps. Like you talk about how you were powerless in that situation. And you were constantly like putting all your past experiences through the lens of you being a drug addict. So that was a thing that happened, you know, nightly. But then daily in the rap sessions, they would set up the rap sessions as being past, present, or future. So people would they'd stand up in group, talk about an incident from their past, and then someone else would be called on to relate to it. Then it would move on to the present day, and people would get called out about their behavior in the place. And largely that was about honesty, about them not being honest or not really talking about their feelings or anything. And that's when the most confrontations would take place in the group. And then they'd set a little time at the end, kind of like a newscast does, about a happy story at the end about future goals and something people want to work on. But that was pretty minimal.
All right, let's talk about honesty. Let's talk about this honesty thing, because you do mention that a lot. That was something core to the straight ideology?
100%.
That's fascinating. You know, it's like you take this horrific, ideological, brainwashing, authoritarian, violence-filled program, and the core of their ideology is honesty, which it's really about conforming and pretending to believe what they want you to believe. How could that be honest? So how was honesty 100%. Used in this way?
There's a weird thing that I'm still like think on about that is they'd call it guys rap, or if you're a girl, they'd call it girls rap. And that was the time that you were able to really talk about sexual deviancy that had taken place in your life that you needed to just like say. I actually find someone could probably take this further. There's probably a lot of analogies, comparative things with clearing in Scientology, where you just like talk about everything that you've like done, and someone has a line on that.
So they would encourage you to talk about sexual deviancy?
Yeah, and guys rap. Yeah, totally. And I'm sure that homosexuality was not an approved lifestyle at that point, you know. So people would talk about if they had had gay experiences and kind of confess that. But yeah, largely centered around guilt, like the same way Christianity does. Why it's so like.
I mean, what's that got to do with addiction?
I don't know. I don't think anything. It all seemed like misbehavior. Like, like let's talk about all your misbehavior. Like that's kind of what that whole ways that you talked or treated your parents, drug use, all this stuff. Even the way they tied in addiction with like misbehavior. It seems like it was largely that. Like some fucked up reform school. I mean, was it Sembler? I need to look into this further. I don't know if Semblers were the origin of this model of rehab, but they were like large movers in it continuing and blossoming because it spread out all over the country.
There was a program that got shut down before Straight, and Semblers pretty much used their model to create Straight, and that program very directly took many of their techniques from the North Korean re-education camp manuals.
Wow.
Like literally brainwashing people into believing in the Kim Jong-un or whatever,
Yeah.
and so a lot of this stuff was brought out in the trials, that ended up bankrupting Straight and forcing them out of business. There was sexual misconduct that went on in Straight too that came out in some of the lawsuits that ended up shutting
sure.
Straight down. Do you know about any of that?
I didn't witness anything like that, but I believe it happened. It's like putting all those humans together. There's all forms of that.
Yeah.
But it was mostly more like violence that I would see. Like, terrible. It was daily.
What? Tell me some more of the violent stories.
Well, even with my thing that you would be violently coerced into, you had to sit in a brown plastic chair all day and you had to sit upright, which, good posture is maybe a good thing, but you had to sit upright with your hands on your knees. And then anytime you wanted to get call on, you had to like rapidly move your arms in a fervor, like that how bad do you want to be sober? So this is all this like group ideology that was happening there where like all these kids, it looks insane. You can see this shit on YouTube too, where all these kids are like, they have their ass affixed to the chair, but their both arms are waving in a circular manner. This is all to get called on. Huh. And if you don't do that, they're like, oh, you don't want to be sober enough? Like you're not motivating like the rest of these people. Like you're not showing this like fervor for sobriety. So if you didn't really follow that, sometimes they'd forcefully take your hands and put them on your knees. Like they're supposed to be there. But like, I don't want to be touched. No one wants to be touched. So any resistance to that leads to more violence, and so that would happen a lot. It was like one time when I resisted that, I remember the entire group behind me pinning me back. Like we're talking like 10 people holding my arms back and then getting punched in the face. It's just like it all happened so fast, but it was just this powerlessness, of being in there. And that's like why I probably started working, because I was just beaten down to a point where I'm like, I don't have any choice but to do this.
All right.
And it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good to resist that long. But there are people that I saw, they call them misbehaviors. If you were not, there's people I saw that like over a year, they never give in. And I want to know where those people are now. Because I'm just like, who is that headstrong that you could just constantly never work this program? Daily, you're getting confronted, and people like nightly, everything. And you just don't. Like, I wasn't that strong. I kind of gave in.
Are you searching for them?
There's a guy named Rob Boyden that I that I always wondered whatever happened to him, and he was I've even seen him in dreams before, and like what happened to that dude?
The hero.
He was just I just said he was able to resist that long, and he never gave in. It was incredible. But you'd also like, I don't know. I feel like that place probably shook loose a lot of mental illness that people had that was maybe latent, that was going to come out at some point, but
shook it loose, meaning brought it out early.
Yeah, it felt that way, because you were just stuck with this confrontation. There was no home, there's no family structure anymore. You were just like in there, like forced to be honest and deal with your feelings in the scope of that place.
You're still saying forced to be honest, but it feels to me like forced to capitulate and tell them what they want to hear you say, and that may not be honesty at all, right?
I know.
Yeah, but that was their term.
Exactly. Total capitulation. Yeah. That it was your disease or whatever else, kind of like talking. And that's why you did it. Also that human behavior is put into the scope of a disease of addiction that made you do that.
Right. Now, here's a question. How many people did you see or do you know of who were able to convince their parents that this place is fucked up and you need to get me out of here? Please get me out of here. Did any parents ever waver from the indoctrination and remove their kids from it?
Yeah, usually it was it would happen if something really like violent had happened to their kid. That was usually when that would happen, that kicked in, but it was so rare. That was like less than like 5% of the people that were in there.
Do you think most parents just were unaware of what was really going on and were being lied to? Or do you think that they were just so fully indoctrinated by the staff into the program too that they I
don't know, like to tell you an incident, there was on the weekends you would often go to host homes that were outside of the city that would be like an hour's drive. And I, as an old comer, I talk about this in the book, I as the old comer had to go with someone, it was their first time going home. And they had been like a misbehavior and started working. And the thing when you get on second phase, you can finally stay back at your house if it's a host home. So that's a pretty like harsh thing that suddenly you've returned home still in the program and your house has probably changed so much, especially in our case, like, I bought records on mail order. I bought punk records. It was all thrown out, and I went back to this sterile home suddenly that all my stuff was gone. And it's like, oh, this is my new life being in this program. But I assisted someone to steward, and towards the end of the weekend, his name was Rusty. Towards the end of the weekend, he changed. He just got so morose and wouldn't talk, and he's like, I'm not going back. And I had to like watch these two newcomers and had to say like, no, dude, we got to go back. He's like, I'm not moving. And he just became sullen and sat on the couch. And they called over this guy, Mr. Baptiste, who was, I just remember he had been in Attica, like during the riots and shit like that too. He was such a like tough, I mean, Florida's full of them. It's such a well-tread path from New York, but he was such a like tough New York dude that came down and, he was going to try and coerce Rusty into going back. But really we knew that he was there to be the muscle. And I watched him try to grab Rusty by the arm, and this kid just started, it's like a crazy demon came out of him in terms of his strength and all this like emotional eruption. And the dad and this Baptiste guy that had come over, they had to wrestle this kid, and they put riot cuffs on him.
His dad did too.
His dad and these two dads are wrestling this kid to put riot cuffs on him, and this kid like had so much built into him, he broke the riot cuffs. I mean, they were tied in the front of him, but he broke them, all this energy. And I was just saying, like, what the fuck? Like, kind of seeing all this happen. But, I mean, that was the parents. The parents had their child in their home and watched this happen, which had to be heartbreaking, to, like, see their kid getting so violently, like, restrained in their house. And then he just, like, that dad that was assisting Baptiste, he just put him in the back of a cargo van, tied in riot cuffs, and his legs and arms for a 2-hour drive back to the rehab. I mean, that's like it's so intense that like that was seen as part of the program. That was part of the treatment, that you had to be tough love to go back to like a catchphrase, which is, it's just, I mean, when has that ever worked?
Yeah.
I don't think it does. Like, what are you going to spank your dog all the time to get it to behave? It's going to fear you. It's going to hate you. And I think in the same way that like this addiction, it's just that ideology, that framework that it's like, oh, this is addiction. You need tough love. You need to be tough with these kids. It's like male Marine Corps style shit. It doesn't work. It does more harm than good.
No shit. Huh?
Yeah.
Wow. Well, I think I got enough. Unless there's anything else you want to say, any topics we missed.
Well, even whether this goes on the record for this or not, but now that we're on the phone, I just feel like I'm happy to be like on such the other side of this now. I'm so happy that these let's say chemicals or these agents, whatever I want to use this like without actually calling it drugs, that these have been a part of my life and been such agents for change and like fantastic change. I kind of did the opposite thing. I did a lot of meditation. I didn't drink till I was 29, and then I got into psychedelic drugs. I think a lot of people go the opposite way.
Right.
But no, I'm so grateful now to it took a long time, but these things were definitely going to find me. I mean, I feel like I'm such an advocate and a vocal person about these things too, even in, let's call it my community. Mm-hmm. But that was another reason why I kind of had to write that book too. It was like I had to go in and process that. I had to kind of like scrub that programming for myself and exercise it. Because it was deep. I mean, that's like how I was brought up to think about these things or to think about drugs or anything else too, which ties it back into it's a religious war. It's like alcohol and everything and caffeine are like highly advocated in the society, but something like MDMA, what that does for like you and your interpersonal relations, something like psilocybin and mushrooms, what that does for your terrestrial and extraterrestrial relations, and then furthering DMT, ketamine, all those things. I'm kind of happy to live in this time and seeing those like pathways forward.
Change is happening.
Yeah, and the work that you do too, and even ideas about like something that Hamilton pointed out about drug determinism, which is also like such a deeply embedded myth, where it's like if you smoke meth once, this is what you're going to look like. Like things like that are those are hard ideas to like wrestle from like public consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
We're going to keep converting other people.
Oh yeah, 100%. If the willingness is there.
Maybe we should set up our pro-drug boot camps and violently recruit anti-druggers into them and make them sit in chairs and beat them until they choose to use drugs, huh?
Yeah, totally. Okay, so.
I'm joking. The means are the ends. The means are the ends.
Yeah. I'm trying to think about if there was anything else, but yeah, I mean, we covered a bunch talking about this. I would also say about how this program, it ruined drug use for a lot of people. Or, like even to tell someone that they're an addict and they need to get sober when you're like 14 or 16, you're in this constant psychology that you have to work through your entire life.
Right.
Where you're like, oh, I failed. I failed. I'm back drinking. I smoke cannabis now. I failed.
Right.
And I think that like fucked up so many people.
Yeah.
Because it's like rampant with death and suicides, people that went through this program, and it also set this template up for parent-child relations. It's like, oh, you're using drugs again? Oh, you're a druggie?
Do we have stats on that? Is there a really higher degree of suicides in straight graduates than other Florida teens at that time?
This is only back like early days of Facebook and Yahoo groups when I would talk to people. There was a running list of deaths. Yeah, it was a long list of post-straight deaths, and I'm sure that data might be in some other place. But it was a lot. I mean, even the people that I know, whether it was just through violent ends. I've made comparisons with other people, but just whether I end the book with my friend Amy that got murdered. That was my only friend from that time. And murdered likely by someone else who was in straight, outside of the whole thing, too. I mean, there's been a 48 hours. That's kind of a separate topic, but they still haven't caught who did that. But, I mean, if they ever do, with murders and that, too.
Yeah.
But,
it was a powerful way to end the book.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it ended, and it was kind of like my getting out of Central Florida, too. And why I wanted to keep it is just like that time period and getting out of there. Because all that skinhead shit that we talked about earlier, dealing with that all the time. Yeah. It ruined shit. Weirdly, as a side note, since we're talking, but my band's going on tour to the West Coast in April, and our last show in Seattle, the Accused are playing with us. They got put on the bill.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, fuck, I'm finally going to see the fucking Accused, and I'm totally bringing him one of these books. I'm like, dude, the last time I tried to see you was when I was 16, and I got arrested at the show, and I never got to see you. So it's just more that grid that I'm talking about the weird synchronicities of life that's something like, oh, now that there's this happening. Yeah.
Right. What's your band called?
Well, I do a few things. I play in a band called Nasty Band, and I do a solo act called Sandy Smiles, and I'm also a background dancer and DJ for this act, Christine. Have you heard of her?
No.
Christine, it's with 2 E's. It's high. It's very worth checking out.
Oh, okay. Send me a link. See some of your stuff. I'll definitely.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We have emails. Yeah. I'll send you a bunch of links.
Cool.
To stuff. I'll send you a link to the publishing imprint too.
All right. Well, thanks so much. This is great.
This is great. Yeah. Honored.
I'm honored. Very much appreciated. I'm sure people are going to love hearing your stories.
Yeah. Thanks for all your work you do too. I want to totally stay in touch with you.
For sure. Thanks, Frank.
Okay. Adios.